My name is Daniel Pierce. I'm 32, a night shift security guard at a small suburban mall in northern Ohio. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment with a cat named Milo, and my life is quiet, maybe even lonely. I like the solitude. Most people find the night shift isolating, but for me it's peaceful.
I, a middle-aged Caucasian woman,
I nap,
read,
I occasionally binge
nap.
horror films. A few months ago, the mall's management offered me overtime covering an entire weekend, and I agreed. They said the main attraction was an old abandoned wing, stores that had closed decades ago but had never been renovated. The thought of roaming empty hallways and silent corridors at 2 a.m. sounded oddly thrilling. I didn't know it would be the worst decision of my life. The mall itself is a relic. The main entrance is glass, fogged over by the cold night air. The abandoned wing stretches off to the east side, dark and narrow, with flickering fluorescent lights that buzz intermittently. The tiles are cracked, and the air smells faintly of mildew and stale carpet. Every once in a while, I catch a whiff of something worse, something coppery, metallic, like blood. But I tell myself it's just rust or a dead animal somewhere behind the walls. The echo in the empty halls is almost musical. The slightest footstep reverberates, bouncing off abandoned storefronts, distorted mannequins, and dusty display cases. I've walked these corridors dozens of times during my shift, but the building itself seems alive, like it's watching me, breathing in rhythm with the flickering lights. Outside, the parking lot is empty, the pavement slick with recent rain. I can see my reflection in the puddles, stretched and wavy, and for a brief moment, I swear I see movement behind me, though the lot is empty. It started the first night I patrolled the abandoned wing. At exactly 1:07 a.m., I swear I saw a shadow move across the far end of the corridor, long, low, crawling along the walls like it was sliding rather than walking. I froze, heart pounding, and waited. Nothing, just the flickering light overhead and my own heavy breathing. I dismissed it as a trick of the light or my imagination. After all, staring at dusty floors and mannequins in flickering fluorescent light late at night can make anyone's mind play tricks. But then the shadow came again the next night, slower this time, almost deliberate. It lingered near the old jewelry store, where the glass was cracked, revealing cobwebbed display cases inside. I thought I heard a faint clicking noise, like fingernails tapping on glass. I told myself it was rats or loose metal settling. Night after night, things escalated. First it was whispers. At first faint, like a distant conversation between people just beyond my line of sight. Then I started hearing footsteps, not my own, not the echo of mall tiles, but deliberate, slow footsteps that matched mine step for step, even when I paused. Objects began to move. A folding chair in the old arcade would be slightly shifted in the morning. Trash cans were knocked over. One night, I found the words "Go Back" scrawled in dust along the floor in letters large enough to be seen from the other side of the hall. I hadn't written them. No one else had been there. I started sleeping less. Nightmares clawed at me, dark corridors stretching endlessly, shadows chasing me down hallways, eyes in the windows of abandoned stores staring at me as I ran. By the fourth night, my nerves were frayed. I carried a flashlight, my pepper spray, and a sense that something malevolent was tracking my every move. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Fears for daily horror stories that will keep you questioning every shadow and every sound in the night. Don't forget to hit the bell, because the next story might be waiting outside your window. On the fifth night, I finally called in a favor. My coworker Jake is a history nerd and knows all the local legends. I asked him if he'd ever heard of anything weird in the mall. Jake hesitated before speaking. "There's a story," he said quietly, "about the old wing. Decades ago, a security guard went missing there. They never found him. Some say he's still there. That the shadows you see are him, or something that took him." I laughed nervously. "A ghost?" Jake shrugged. "Call it what you want. But every time someone new works the late shift, they report shadows, whispers, and movement. It's like the building doesn't want people in that wing." It sounded like a fairy tale, but the way he said it made my stomach turn. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had become part of that story. It happened on the sixth night. I was doing my routine patrol, flashlight sweeping across the cracked tiles and darkened storefronts. The shadow appeared at the far end again. This time I didn't hesitate. I moved toward it, heart hammering, voice shaking as I called out, "Hey, who's there?" The shadow didn't respond. It stretched, grew taller, eyes glowing faintly red, if eyes they were at all. A low, guttural hum filled the hallway, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. I turned to run, but the corridor seemed to twist, elongate, making it impossible to escape. I tripped over a chair and fell against a display case. That's when I saw it, figures emerging from the walls, black shapes with no faces, moving faster than they should. One of them lunged at me. I screamed, rolling to my feet, and ran. The doors at the far end were locked. The lights flickered violently, then went out entirely, plunging me into darkness. I could hear them, breathing, scraping, whispering my name. Daniel, Daniel. The sound was coming from every corner, every surface, like the building itself had swallowed me whole. Somehow, by sheer luck or desperation, I found the emergency exit at the back of the wing. I threw the door open, gasping for air. The parking lot was empty, quiet. The night air never felt so good. I left my flashlight on the floor and didn't look back. I haven't returned to that wing since. The mall still employs night security guards, and I've warned management that something isn't right. But no one believes me. The rumors persist, though. Employees whisper about shadows moving in the abandoned wing. New guards quit mid-shift. The building sits silently waiting. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and hear a tapping noise at my window. Faint but unmistakable. I swear it's the same whispering voice from the mall. Daniel. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to know. But I do know this. Whatever haunts that wing is still there, and it's patient. And maybe one day it will be waiting for someone else. If you want more spine-chilling true accounts, subscribe to Untold Fears. Remember, the shadows are always closer than you think. And sometimes they're watching you even as you sleep. But the horrors of that abandoned mall were only the beginning. Because in the mountains of New York, another security team would soon discover that glass walls and emergency exits can't keep out the darkness. My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 29, and I work as a retail manager at a small chain in Ohio. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment, and to be honest, my life is quiet, maybe even lonely at times. I don't have kids, my family lives across the state, and my few friends are always busy with their own lives. Solitude isn't bad most days. It's comforting, predictable. But sometimes I crave a little excitement, or at least a change of scenery. That's why I agreed to stay overnight at one of the larger malls my company manages. The mall wasn't open for renovations yet, but they wanted someone to keep an eye on the floors, make sure contractors weren't stealing materials, and check the building's security systems. I told myself it would be simple. A night of wandering empty hallways, maybe reading a book, and catching a few hours of sleep on a folding chair. I never imagined I'd leave that building terrified of its silence. The mall itself is massive, 3 stories of glass, steel, and empty stores. Some sections are newer, with polished tiles and bright lights. But the older wings, particularly the east side where I was assigned, feel like something out of a forgotten era. The fluorescent lights flicker intermittently, casting uneven shadows across cracked tiles and dusty mannequins. You can smell the mixture of stagnant air, damp carpets, and the faint metallic tang of old wiring. Every step I took echoed eerily, bouncing off abandoned storefronts like the building was amplifying my own presence. Even the escalators groaned like tired beasts when the power hummed through them. I had my office on the 3rd floor, and the elevator was the only convenient way to reach the upper levels. It was old, scratched, and smelled faintly of oil and cleaning chemicals. The buttons were worn down from decades of use, the metal panels cold to the touch. I'd ridden it twice during the day and found it mundane, just an elevator. But at night, in the absence of everything else, the building felt different. The first odd thing happened on my second night. I'd been in the office reviewing inventory reports when I heard the elevator hum from the floor below. Odd because I hadn't called it and the doors were closed. I told myself I must have imagined it. Old elevators make noises. Maybe the building was settling. But when I went to check, the elevator doors were wide open on my floor. There was no one inside, not a single footprint. The doors stayed open for a long moment before closing slowly, as if sighing. My stomach twisted, but I laughed at myself. Just an electrical glitch, I muttered, pushing the thought aside. By the 3rd night, the occurrences became impossible to ignore. I was walking toward the stairwell after checking the 1st floor when I heard the elevator ding from the 2nd floor. I looked up. The doors opened, empty. I didn't call it. No one else was in the building. And then, as I watched, the elevator began to move, up, then down by itself. The doors opened at the first floor, then closed again, humming and shaking slightly as if the elevator were alive. I backed away and left the area, my heart hammering. The rational part of my mind said this had to be a wiring issue or someone pranking me, but the feeling in my gut, the sense of being watched, was growing stronger. Night after night, the elevator's behavior became more pronounced. It would move even when I had left it alone, sometimes stopping at floors where there were no offices or rooms, doors opening to nothing but empty walls. Sometimes I thought I saw a shadow step inside, quick, out of the corner of my eye, only for it to vanish when I turned. Objects started to shift slightly. Papers in the office moved, a chair nudged forward. A broom left in the hall was knocked to the floor. It was subtle at first, almost teasing, but it was consistent. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamt of the elevator, doors opening to blackness, lights flickering, and a low hum that seemed to echo directly in my skull. Sometimes I'd wake to the sound of metal sliding, soft but unmistakable, the elevator moving again. I'd sit in my chair, frozen, waiting for the hum to stop, for the silence to return. But it never truly did. On the fifth night, I decided to call the building's night maintenance supervisor, Mr. Hallbrook. He was an older man, wiry with a slow, deliberate way of speaking, who'd worked in the mall for over 40 years. When I explained what was happening, he didn't laugh, but his expression hardened. "You're not the first," he said, voice low. "That elevator? It has a history. People have vanished near it. Some swear it moves on its own, sometimes trapping people inside. They say it's drawn to fear, that it wants something." I blinked at him, unsure if he was joking. "Vanished? You mean—" "Permanently," he nodded. "I don't know. Files are sketchy, the story's vague. But you're not imagining it. That elevator doesn't like being ignored. It responds. It watches. Be careful, Claire." That night, the elevator did more than watch. I was returning to the office from the second floor, mind focused on my laptop, when the hum began. I looked up. The doors opened in front of me. I stepped back, then froze. There was a figure inside, not fully visible, just a shadowy outline, taller than any person should be, swaying slightly. Its presence pressed against my chest like water, suffocating and cold. My hands shook as I fumbled for the stairs, but the elevator doors closed just as I turned, trapping the figure inside. I ran, feet pounding against the empty floors, heart hammering. The hum followed me, echoing in the corridors, twisting and bouncing off the walls, always one step behind. I made it to the office and locked the door, chest heaving. The building was quiet. Too quiet. I could still hear the faint metallic sliding sound beneath the hum of the ventilation system, like the elevator was moving through the walls rather than the shaft. By the seventh night, I could no longer ignore the feeling of being hunted. The elevator no longer waited for me. It stalked me. Sometimes, when I left my office to check a different floor, I'd glance toward the shaft and see the doors part slowly, as if it knew where I was headed. Once I swore I saw hands, pale, elongated, impossibly thin, reaching out from the elevator's interior. I slammed my office door, heart thundering, and sat pressed against the wall until dawn. I couldn't leave the building, not entirely. The mall required overnight security, and the next shift depended on me to make it through. But each step I took, each time I ascended the stairs instead of trusting the elevator, I felt eyes following me, an intelligence in that hum, that subtle vibration through the floorboards, that metallic scent of the machinery. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Fears for daily horror stories that will keep you questioning every shadow and every sound in the night. Don't forget to hit the bell, because the next story might be waiting just outside your window. The final night was chaos. I had made it through most of the shift, trying to avoid the elevator entirely, but I needed to check the first floor for a maintenance issue. As I approached the shaft, the elevator doors slid open on their own, and the shadow appeared again. This time it stepped forward, full form visible now, black, amorphous, features indistinguishable, yet it radiated menace. My stomach dropped. I ran, but the building seemed different. Corridors stretched unnaturally, the tiles distorted under flickering lights. The shadow followed, gliding silently behind, faster than I could run. I turned a corner and found myself in front of the elevator again. The doors open, inviting. A whisper, low and cold, drifted from within. "Come." I stumbled back, tears streaming, gasping. My legs moved on instinct. heart screaming as the shadow lunged. I barely made it to the stairwell and bolted down to the parking garage, gasping for air, the smell of oil and metal thick in my lungs. When I turned to look back, the elevator doors slid open at the top of the shaft. No one was inside, but the hum remained, a low vibration that seemed to echo through the concrete and steel. I didn't look back again. I didn't go near that wing for weeks. Even now, months later, I hear an elevator hum in my dreams. It wakes me at 3 a.m., always just outside my apartment door. The building, the shadow, whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. People who visit the mall sometimes whisper about the elevator, about it moving on its own, trapping people for moments no one can explain. Some say if you step inside at the wrong time, you vanish. I don't know if I believe all of it, but I know enough to stay away. That building, that elevator, it isn't just machinery. It's something else. Patient, intelligent, and hungry. But the horrors of that mall were only the beginning. In other towns, in other buildings, strange things stir in elevators and shafts, waiting for someone late at night to step inside. If you thought this story was terrifying, wait until you hear what happened in a small hotel in New York, where the elevator refused to stop at any floor. My name is Sarah Whitman. I'm 27, and I work as a retail associate at a small clothing store in a suburban mall in Michigan. My life is ordinary and quiet, maybe too quiet. I live alone in a small apartment, spend most evenings reading or streaming shows, and I rarely venture out after dark unless I have to. That sense of isolation has always been comfortable, even soothing, until that weekend at the mall. I had been asked to stay late for inventory one Friday evening. The mall was closing for renovations, and most of the stores were already empty, their shutters down, mannequins staring out with frozen smiles. I didn't think much of it at first, just another quiet night, a chance to get ahead of the weekend rush. My manager promised it would be fine. The security team would be there, the doors would be locked, and the cameras monitored every corner. I agreed, thinking I could finish my work and be home before midnight. The mall felt different as soon as I entered that night. The usual hum of air conditioning and distant music from open stores was gone. It was replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence, punctuated only by the occasional click of lights and the echo of my footsteps. The tiles, normally clean and polished, seemed dull and uneven in the dim emergency lighting. Dust clung to corners, and a faint smell of mildew and stagnant water lingered, like the mall itself had been breathing in its emptiness for years. Every reflection in the glass storefronts seemed distorted, sometimes appearing to move when I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid, until the first strange thing happened. I was walking past an empty electronics store when I realized the main doors had shut, locked. That wasn't unusual on its own. The mall was supposed to be closed, but something about the click, the way the doors sealed without anyone touching them, made my stomach tighten. I walked toward the security office to check the time, thinking maybe the system had glitched, but the office was dark. No one was inside. The keypads on the doors were glowing faintly, yet unresponsive. Panic started to creep in. I tried calling the security team. My phone had no signal. I ran to the nearest open store, hoping to find a guard or even another employee. Every hallway was empty, every storefront lifeless. I could hear my own footsteps echoing back at me, louder and sharper than they should have. And then I heard something else. A soft, dragging noise, like someone or something walking behind me. I spun around. Nothing, just empty hallways stretching into shadow. The first night I spent trapped was disorienting. I wandered the mall, checking every exit, every door. Nothing opened. Every attempt to reach the parking lot ended with doors that refused to budge, elevators that shuddered but didn't move, and stairwells that seemed to twist slightly out of place. I convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe the renovation crew had decided to lock the doors for safety, and someone forgot to tell me. But the feeling of being watched persisted. Every reflection in the glass storefronts seemed to linger a moment too long, like someone, or something, was mirroring me, waiting. By the second night, I noticed the smaller disturbances. Items I had carried earlier were moved. A water bottle shifted on a counter, a notebook left open face down, a pen rolling across the floor as if nudged by an invisible hand. The drag of footsteps grew more distinct. Sometimes it felt deliberate, following me at the same pace, stopping when I stopped, always just behind. The mall's soundscape, empty, normally comforting, became a theater for these subtle horrors. A distant knock here, a faint scraping there. The hum of air vents became a whispering voice, carrying syllables I couldn't understand. Sleep was impossible. I found a folding chair in a closed bookstore and collapsed on it, trying to rest. But every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the mall shifting around me. Hallways stretched endlessly, doors opened to walls, elevators swaying like they were breathing. I woke drenched in sweat to the soft echo of that dragging noise. Something was moving behind me, always just out of reach. I eventually found a maintenance worker named Mr. Callahan, who had been locked in another wing during renovations. He was an older man with thinning hair and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, but when he saw the terror in my eyes, he didn't mock me. "You're not imagining it," he said. "This mall, it's old. They say it's cursed in some sections. People vanish here sometimes, never found. Doors shut by themselves, lights flicker. It reacts to fear. You have to stay calm." I wanted to laugh, wanted to dismiss it as superstition. But when I went back to the electronics wing, the elevator shuddered violently and opened, empty, yet inviting. I swear I felt a hand brush my shoulder as I passed. I turned, nothing. But my shadow on the floor stretched, distorted, and lingered longer than it should have. The escalation became terrifyingly personal. I would hear whispers calling my name, sometimes multiple voices, layered, overlapping, soft but insistent. "Sarah, come." One night I found the words "stay" etched into a dusty countertop, letters too precise to have been made by accident. I tried to leave through the rear exits, but the doors wouldn't budge. The mall itself seemed alive, anticipating my movements, guiding me deeper into its heart. The final encounter came unexpectedly. I had been wandering near the food court, trying to find a service stairwell, when I saw a figure ahead. It was blurred, human-shaped, but its movements were wrong, jerky, like a puppet with cut strings, tilting its head too far, limbs moving in impossible angles. My legs froze. The figure didn't speak, but tilted its head toward me, an unspoken invitation, or a warning. I turned to run, and the hallway behind me was gone. Walls that had been straight stretched and warped, leading me back toward the figure. Panic-stricken, I dove into an empty shop, hiding behind counters and shelving. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. The soft drag of footsteps followed me, circling, sometimes stopping, sometimes brushing against the walls. I could hear the low whispering closer now, overlapping with a metallic scraping, like fingernails on tile. The lights flickered violently, plunging me into darkness for brief, suffocating seconds before snapping back. Somehow I made it to the security office. I managed to pry open a window onto a fire escape and climbed down into the cold night air. The mall loomed behind me, silent again, but I knew it was waiting, watching. Something had tried to keep me inside, something that had learned the sound of my fear. Even now, months later, I can't bring myself to return. The mall reopened after renovations, but I can't shake the memory of the dragging footsteps, the whispers, the figure with jerking, unnatural movements. Friends tell me I'm imagining it, that it was stress or sleep deprivation, but I know what I experienced was real. Some nights I swear I hear the same soft drag of steps outside my apartment, faint but deliberate. The mall is still there, waiting for someone else, for another soul to get trapped inside. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Fears for daily horror stories that will keep you questioning every shadow and every sound in the night. Don't forget to hit the bell, because the next story might be waiting just outside your window. The mall isn't the only place with horrors that seem alive. If you thought being locked inside an empty building was terrifying, wait until you hear what happened to a night shift security team in New York, where the glass walls couldn't keep out a presence that seemed to walk through solid doors. My name is Jason Miller. I'm 31, and I work in IT for a regional chain of malls across Ohio. My life is ordinary, quiet, and often painfully routine. I live alone, my social life is minimal, and I spend most nights gaming or catching up on movies. I'm not the adventurous type, but a few months ago, my manager offered me a special assignment to spend an entire weekend at one of our older malls to test a new security system and the integration with our arcade. It sounded mundane at first, just checking cameras, logging events, and troubleshooting network issues, but I needed the extra money. I agreed. The mall in question was one of the oldest in our chain, built in the late 1970s. Its arcade had been a popular spot for kids and teenagers, but over the years, Most of the arcade machines had been left to gather dust. Some worked intermittently, some had been unplugged, and a few were clearly beyond repair. I arrived late Friday afternoon, parking in a near-empty lot that was slick from an earlier rain. The sky was a dull gray and fog had begun to roll in, blanketing the surrounding streets in a thick, wet haze. Inside, the mall felt wrong. Not in a way I could immediately explain, but in a low, instinctive way. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, and the polished tile floors reflected shadows that didn't seem quite right. I passed shuttered stores, their mannequins frozen mid-pose, eyes staring blankly, reflecting back at me in the glass. The smell of damp carpeting and old upholstery hung heavy in the air, mingled with a faint tang of ozone from the security systems being tested. The arcade itself, tucked into a corner near the east wing, felt like a separate world. It was dark, dusty and silent, the machines lined up like sentinels, their screens black and lifeless. The coin slots glinted under the flickering lights, reflecting the shadows of the empty mall. I set up in the arcade office, my laptop connected to the network, testing the cameras and the machine consoles. Everything seemed fine, at least for the first few hours. Then, just after midnight, I heard it, the ping of a coin slot and the whirring of a machine starting up. My eyes snapped to the machines. They were all off. I walked closer. One by one, several machines powered on without anyone touching them. The screens lit up with their attract mode, blinking colors and music that echoed strangely across the empty mall. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was some quirk of the old wiring. Arcade machines from that era had been known to flicker on by themselves, especially when connected to old networks. But the sound of the digital chimes was loud in the empty space, and I could swear I felt movement in the shadows between the rows of machines. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I ignored it, focusing on my work, though I kept glancing over my shoulder. By the second night, the arcade had escalated. Machines would turn on in sequence as if following me, their lights and sounds choreographed with an unnatural intelligence. I would walk past a row, and a machine behind me would fire up, its music loud and out of place in the stillness. Sometimes I thought I saw figures moving between the machines, shapes too tall and thin to be human, flitting just beyond the light of the flickering fluorescence. The air grew colder in the arcade, damp and heavy, and I could smell something faintly metallic, like rusted blood. My hands shook, and my heart raced, but I tried to maintain logic. It was old wiring, faulty sensors, my mind playing tricks. Restless sleep became a problem. I tried napping in the small arcade office, but I would wake to the music of machines playing in the empty hallways, screens glowing in the darkness. Sometimes the music was faint, almost as if coming from a distance, and then suddenly blaring next to me, synchronized with a heavy thump on the floor. Nightmares invaded my rest. Rows of machines with faces on the screens, staring, smiling, whispering. Screens would flicker to life with messages, stay, play, forever. I began to dread every trip into the arcade, even for routine checks. It was on the third night that I finally met someone who made me realize I wasn't imagining things. A maintenance worker named Frank had stayed late to check HVAC systems. He was in his 60s, wiry, with a steady gaze that seemed to see right through me. I mentioned the machines powering on by themselves, trying to sound rational. Frank didn't laugh. His expression darkened. "You're seeing it," he said. "It's the arcade. This part of the mall. It's older than anyone realizes. Machines that turn on by themselves. Shadows moving between them. Kids who vanish while playing. There are stories going back decades. People call it the arcade spirit. It feeds on presence, on attention. It learns, imitates, lures you in. Once it notices someone, it doesn't forget." I felt my stomach twist. "People vanish? What do you mean?" Frank shrugged, his hands busy with a wrench. "No one knows for sure. Just, they disappear. Parents come to pick them up, but they're gone. Cameras catch only static or figures moving too fast to see clearly. The mall doesn't like to talk about it, but the arcade has always been different. The machines respond to fear. They attract it. That night, the machines became more aggressive. I was checking one row when all of the screens around me powered on at once. The bright lights reflected in the polished tiles, making shadows dance like grotesque puppets. I could hear whispers now, overlapping with the music. Play. Stay forever. I spun around trying to locate the source, but there was nothing. The air was thick, the chill biting my skin. Then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. I whipped around, no one. Just the dark space between machines. By the fourth night, I couldn't go anywhere without the machines reacting. I would walk down a row and the closest game would start its attract mode, blaring its music. Step toward the next row and the previous game would fire up. Sometimes I thought I saw screens flash images of me, blurred and distorted. My nerves were fraying. My sleep was non-existent. I had stopped checking cameras, stopped trying to record anything. The arcade was alive and I was a part of it. The climax came on the fifth night. I was trying to leave for a quick break when the arcade doors locked behind me. Every machine turned on at once, their screens a cacophony of flashing colors and distorted music. Shadows stretched and twisted between the rows, shapes taller and thinner than any human should be, moving too fast to track. I ran, weaving between machines, the music and whispers following me, echoing off the empty walls. I tripped over a power cord, scraping my knee, and looked up to see a screen display. My face, pale, staring back at me, eyes wide in terror. I scrambled to the exit, yanking at the handle. The doors wouldn't budge. The whispers intensified. "Stay! Play! Forever!" I could feel the cold, metallic smell rising, the air thickening. Then, a shape lunged from the shadows, tall, black, featureless, gliding across the floor like liquid. I slammed my body against the doors, screaming, and finally they gave way. I stumbled into the main corridor, heart hammering, shaking so hard I could barely stand. I ran down the empty halls, past the closed stores, past the silent food court, until I reached the main entrance. The sliding doors opened and I fell out onto the wet pavement, gasping for air. The arcade was silent again, dark and lifeless as if nothing had happened. But I knew it hadn't been imagination. Something was in there, waiting, patient, hungry for attention. Even now, months later, I can't enter an arcade without anxiety. I avoid malls at night, avoid quiet spaces where machines hum and glow. Sometimes I dream of the arcade, rows of machines lighting up in sequence, shadows moving too fast to see clearly, music blaring, and a whisper that calls my name. The mall reopened, the arcade cleaned and refurbished, but I know the old machines, or something in the space, still remembers, still waits, still plays. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Fears for daily horror stories that will keep you questioning every shadow and every sound in the night. Don't forget to hit the bell, because the next story might be waiting just outside your window. The horrors of that empty arcade were only the beginning. In other malls, other abandoned game rooms, the shadows lurk behind flickering screens. And in a small theater in Pennsylvania, the lights will soon come on by themselves, and someone else will learn that machines can think. And they never forget who watches. My name is Emily Harris. I'm 28, and I work as a night shift security officer at a regional mall in Pennsylvania. Most people think my job is easy, just sitting in an office, watching cameras, and patrolling the halls occasionally. But it can be lonely. I live alone, my apartment is quiet, and most nights the only voices I hear are the echoes of the mall itself. I like the solitude most of the time. It suits me. But the weekend I was assigned to the Pine Brook Mall, I realized that loneliness can turn sinister when it's amplified by silence. I had volunteered for a double shift on a Saturday because my supervisor promised extra hours. The mall was old, built in the late 1980s, and large sections were already abandoned. Many of the stores had shuttered years ago, leaving empty glass storefronts that reflected shadows in unsettling ways. My shift started at 10 p.m. after the mall had closed, and I was tasked with walking the halls, checking the perimeter, and monitoring the security feeds. At first, everything seemed routine. The usual buzz of fluorescent lights, the occasional hum of the ventilation system, and the faint music still playing on some store speakers. But there was something about the emptiness that felt wrong. The food court, usually filled with families and teenagers, was silent except for the faint drip of a leaky fountain in the corner. Tables were stacked on chairs, chairs were flipped upside down, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long, unnatural shadows. The air smelled of old grease, damp linoleum, and a faint chemical scent from the cleaning supplies left behind by the janitorial staff. As I walked past the closed kiosks, my boots echoed against the polished tiles, and I felt an uneasy chill that wasn't coming from the AC. I was halfway through my first round when I heard it, a soft, a muffled sob coming from the far end of the food court. I froze, my stomach twisted. There shouldn't have been anyone there. The last customers had been ushered out hours ago, and I hadn't seen a single soul since I started my shift. I told myself it was probably the wind or the hum of the ventilation system carrying odd echoes. But the sound persisted. Slow, quiet, deliberate sobbing. I walked toward the noise cautiously, calling out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded tiny against the vast, empty hall. The sobbing stopped immediately. I waited, straining to hear anything, but all I could hear was the soft drip from the fountain and my own rapid heartbeat. I laughed nervously at myself. Probably a stray recording left on one of the old music systems, I thought. Nothing to worry about, but then I heard it again. A single wet sob coming from the corner by the empty McDonald's kiosk. I approached slowly. The sound was closer now, clearer, almost human. I swore I could feel the air grow colder, like someone had opened a freezer in the middle of the food court. My fingers trembled as I reached the corner, and there was nothing. Just the empty floor, stacked chairs, and the dark reflection of the overhead lights in the linoleum tiles. I told myself to stay calm, to rationalize. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe I was imagining things after weeks of long, quiet shifts. I made a quick round through the rest of the food court and then headed back to my security office. But even from the doorway of the office, I could hear faint sobbing echoing back from the corner. Night after night, the crying became more insistent. It didn't follow a pattern, but it always came from the same area, the far end of the food court where the old fountain stood. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was the mall settling, pipes vibrating, or some electrical hum manifesting as a sound I could interpret as sobbing. But after the third night, ignoring it became impossible. Objects started moving. Chairs I had stacked neatly were found toppled in odd patterns. A tray left on a counter would be in a completely different spot when I returned. Once I saw a shadow flicker across the tiles, tall and thin, moving between the darkened storefronts. My eyes widened, but when I focused, there was nothing there. The mall seemed to have a rhythm, responding to my movements, following me with unseen attention. Sleep became impossible during my shifts. I would close my eyes for a moment, and in my mind, I would see a small child sitting on the floor of the food court, wet tears rolling down its face, staring at me with hollow eyes. Sometimes I would wake in a cold sweat, convinced I had heard footsteps or soft whispers calling my name. The sobbing now seemed to echo in the walls themselves, following me as I moved from hall to hall. On the fourth night, I was finally approached by an older security officer, Mr. Green, who had been working at the mall for over 20 years. I explained the crying voice, the shadows, and the shifting objects. He didn't scoff. His face turned serious. "You've heard it then," he said, his voice low. "They call it the weeping child. Mall folklore, I know, but people have reported the sound for decades. It always starts in the food court, always after closing. Some say it's a ghost of a child who went missing years ago. Others say it's something that feeds on the emptiness, on fear, on isolation. It doesn't like being ignored, and it doesn't like being questioned. You need to be careful." I felt my stomach drop. "But it's just a story, right? A legend?" He shook his head. "I used to think so too. Until I heard it myself. Until I saw the shadows. Some things in this mall, they aren't human. And some things never leave." That night I learned exactly what he meant. I had finished my rounds and was returning to the office when the sobbing started again. It was louder this time, desperate, almost pleading. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard footsteps, soft, dragging across the tiles. I spun around. Empty hallways, every doorway dark and silent. I could feel the chill pressing in, colder than the AC should have made it. I reached the corner of the food court and froze. In the dim light of a flickering fluorescent, I saw it. A small figure crouched by the fountain. A child, no more than 8 or 9, hair soaked and plastered to its face, shoulders shaking with sobs. Its eyes, large, dark, endless, locked on mine. My heart raced. I tried to speak, but no words came. The child slowly raised a hand, pointing at me, whispering, "Don't leave me." I stumbled back. The lights flickered violently and the figure vanished. In its place, a cold wind swirled through the empty food court. I ran to the security office, locking the door behind me. The sobbing continued, now echoing as if the walls themselves were crying. I could hear whispers layered over the sobs. Stay, stay. The following night I wasn't sure I wanted to return. But duty and fear of losing my job forced me to go in. The moment I entered the mall, the feeling returned. Heavy, watching, patient. I walked past the food court, and the crying began immediately, louder and closer than ever. I could feel it vibrating through the tiles, through my bones. Shadows flickered along the walls, and the reflections in the glass storefronts seemed distorted, stretching toward me. I decided to confront it. I walked slowly into the center of the food court, calling out, "I'm here." "I'm not leaving." The sobbing paused. A long, chilling silence followed. And then all at once the fountain turned on by itself. Water spouted erratically, hitting the tiled floor and echoing in a harsh metallic rhythm. Chairs toppled. A cold mist rose from the fountain, forming shapes in the air, small, childlike forms that shrieked and sobbed. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, tripping over a chair. I ran, faster than I had ever run, out of the food court and through the endless hallways. The echoes of sobbing and whispers chased me, blending with the flickering lights and the distorted reflections in the glass. I finally reached the main entrance and flung open the doors, stumbling into the cold night air. Behind me, the mall was silent again. Empty. But I knew it wasn't. Even now, months later, I can't enter a food court without anxiety. I avoid malls at night, avoid empty hallways, avoid the corners where shadows linger and cries echo. Friends laugh and say I'm imagining things, but I know what I experienced. Some things in this world don't leave. Some things wait patient in the dark corners of spaces designed to feel safe, ready for the next person alone enough to hear the crying. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Fears for daily horror stories that will keep you questioning every shadow and every sound in the night. Don't forget to hit the bell, because the next story might be waiting just outside your window. The food court cries were only the beginning. In other abandoned sections of malls, in empty movie theaters, in the dim corners of shuttered arcades, shadows still linger. And somewhere in a mall in New York, someone else will soon hear the first sobs. My name is Mark Reynolds, and I've been working as a night shift security officer at suburban malls for nearly 5 years. I'm 32, single, and my life mostly revolves around long hours, quiet nights, and an unhealthy obsession with true crime podcasts. People think it's a lonely job, but for me, it was comfortable until that night at the Willow Creek Mall, when everything ordinary turned terrifying. I was assigned to Willow Creek for a routine weekend shift. The mall was older, a relic from the 1980s, with low ceilings, narrow corridors, and a maze-like layout. Most of the stores were still operational, but a few had closed years ago, leaving dark, empty spaces that stretched like silent alleys. I arrived around 10 p.m., parked in the near-empty lot, and stepped into the cavernous interior. The usual hum of refrigeration units and fluorescent lights filled the air, and a faint smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with lingering popcorn and fried food from the food court. My route was simple: a slow patrol of the main corridors, occasional checks of the parking lot, and monitoring the camera feeds. The night started normally. The mall was quiet, nearly empty, save for a late janitor pushing a mop in the distant food court. I greeted him and he gave a weary wave. The fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, giving the corridors a restless, almost breathing feel. The shadows seemed to twitch at the edge of vision, and I felt a prickling sensation along the back of my neck. I shrugged it off. Old buildings always have that effect, but there was an undertone of tension I couldn't place. Around midnight, I reached the restroom corridor near the north wing. It was a narrow hall with tile floors that reflected the dim light like a shallow pond. The faint hum of the ventilation system echoed, and the echo of my footsteps made the corridor feel endless. That's when I noticed it, a figure at the far end, just outside the women's restroom entrance. It was impossible to see clearly. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, but the outline of someone standing, unmoving, staring in my direction. My stomach tightened. I called out, "Hello? Security here. Are you okay?" The figure didn't respond. My voice echoed, bouncing between the walls. I took a cautious step forward. The figure vanished. Just like that. I blinked. Maybe it was a mannequin left from a promotional display. But no, this corridor had been empty for years. I checked the restroom entrances, doors locked and unoccupied. Shaking my head, I told myself it was a trick of light and shadow, nothing more. But that was only the beginning. The following nights I began noticing the same pattern. A glimpse of someone at the corridor's end, always in the same spot, just standing there. Every time I approached, the figure disappeared. Sometimes I would hear faint scraping sounds on the tile, like shoes dragging slowly across the floor. Other times there were whispers, impossible to understand, but clearly human. The corridor felt alive, watching, waiting. My patrols grew shorter, my anxiety rising with every turn. I stopped feeling comfortable alone in the mall. Objects began to move. A janitor's bucket would be pushed to a different corner. Trash bins would be overturned. One night, a small pair of children's shoes appeared at the corridor's entrance. I didn't see anyone wearing them, and the janitor insisted he hadn't brought them there. I started carrying a flashlight, swinging it ahead of me, but the shadows always seemed to avoid the light, melting into the corners, staying just out of reach. I confided in my coworker, Sarah, who had been working security for longer than I had. She didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me. She told me the mall had a long history of strange events. "There's a story about a stalker," she said. "Not a real person, at least not anymore. A man was killed years ago in that corridor. Security cameras caught him standing, just watching. He followed women, never harming anyone, but after his death, people say his presence lingered. Sometimes he's described as a shadow, sometimes as a man in the distance, waiting. That corridor, he never left." I tried to rationalize it. It had to be urban legend and exaggeration. But by the third night, the horror became undeniable. I was walking the corridor, flashlight in hand, when I heard soft, deliberate footsteps behind me. I spun around, nothing. I quickened my pace. The footsteps echoed, following me, matching my stride. My flashlight beam swept the corridor empty. I made it to the end near the food court, but the feeling persisted. I could feel eyes on me, a presence behind my back, just out of reach. Then a voice, low, hoarse, whispering my name. "Mark." I froze. Every muscle in my body tightened. The voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. It was ragged, distant, but intimate, as though the corridor itself had learned to mimic familiarity. I ran to the security office, heart hammering, shutting the door and locking it. The whispers continued, faintly, almost teasing. I stared at the monitors, but all cameras showed only empty halls. Nothing to explain the steps, the voice, the shifting shadows. The final night came faster than I anticipated. I was scheduled to leave at 6 a.m., and I tried to steel myself for one last patrol. As I approached the restroom corridor, the air turned icy. My breath fogged, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I reached the corridor, flashlight shaking in my grip. And then I saw him, the figure at the far end, tall and shadowed, but unmistakably human in outline. He didn't move, didn't blink, but I could feel him watching me. My instinct screamed at me to retreat, but curiosity, stupid, dangerous curiosity, kept me rooted. He began to advance, slow, deliberate steps that echoed off the tile. I could see nothing of his face, just the outline, the impossibility of how he moved. Silent in some steps, heavy in others, each one closer, each one deliberate. I stumbled back. The flashlight flickered. The figure disappeared, then reappeared closer. Every time I raised my weapon, even the small flashlight, he seemed to avoid it, shifting unnaturally, gliding over the floor, a predator and observer in one. My breaths were shallow, ragged. The whispers came again, multiple voices this time, layered, all calling my name. I ran, down the corridor, turning corners blindly. Every hall looked identical, and I felt him everywhere, around me, behind me, in the reflections of the glass storefronts. I reached a service door that led to the parking lot. With trembling hands, I slammed it open, stumbling out into the cold night air. Behind me, the corridor was empty, silent, normal, but I knew it wasn't. Even now, weeks later, I can't enter a mall restroom corridor without that same sense of being watched. The fear lingers, a shadow behind my mind, always present. The Willow Creek Mall remains open, its lights buzzing and flickering, its corridors stretching silently, waiting. And I know the stalker waits too, patient for the next person alone enough to walk the hall at night. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Fears for daily horror stories that will keep you questioning every shadow and every sound in the night. Don't forget to hit the bell, because the next story might be waiting just outside your window. The stalker in the restroom corridor was only one of many shadows lurking in the abandoned wings of malls across the country. And in another small, dimly lit shopping center, A security guard would soon discover that some presences never leave, watching, patient, and impossibly close. My name is Laura Hayes. I'm 27, a freelance graphic designer who spends most of my life behind screens, tucked away in my small apartment in Pittsburgh. I don't have a lot of friends and my social life is almost non-existent, but I like it that way. Quiet suits me. But a few months ago, I learned just how dangerous silence can be when I took a temporary night shift security job at the Maplewood Mall. I had been looking for a way to make extra money during a slow freelance month. My cousin worked part-time there, and she mentioned that the mall needed a couple of overnight security officers while they did renovations in the older wings. I figured it would be an easy gig, monitor the cameras, do a few rounds, and collect a paycheck. I never expected it to become a nightmare. The first night started normally. Maplewood is an aging mall built in the late 70s with wide corridors, glass skylights, and an old cavernous food court. Some stores were closed permanently, their darkened windows reflecting shadows like mirrors. The air smelled faintly of mildew and dust, mixed with a lingering aroma of fried food from the food court. The tiles were cold under my boots, and the ventilation system hummed constantly, giving the impression that the walls themselves were alive. I walked my first round slowly, noting the flickering lights and the occasional drip of water from a ceiling pipe. The service exits at the back of the mall, which were usually locked, creaked slightly whenever the wind shifted outside. Everything felt wrong, but I tried to shrug it off. New jobs always make you nervous. Around midnight, while doing my routine check of the East Wing, I noticed something odd near the service exit by the old department store. A dark reddish stain on the floor. At first, I thought it was rust from the delivery trolleys or some spilled cleaning solution. But the pattern was strange, almost like smears, dragged across the tile. I crouched to examine it. My stomach churned. It had a metallic smell, unmistakably like blood. I called my supervisor on the walkie-talkie. "Hey, Chris, there's a stain near the service exit. Looks like, I don't know. Maybe someone cut themselves?" There was static, then his calm voice. "Probably an old mess from the renovations. Mop it up if it bothers you." I wanted to believe him. I took out a rag, dipped it in water, and dabbed at the stain. But no matter how much I wiped, the streaks remained, deepening in color as if the tile was absorbing them. My hands trembled. I looked up the corridor. The mall was empty, eerily silent except for the hum of lights and the occasional drip. I felt eyes on me, though I knew I was alone. The next night, I returned to the same area. The stain had grown. Or maybe it had always been that large and I hadn't noticed. The metallic scent hung heavier in the air. And then I saw footprints, barely visible but unmistakable, smeared in the dark stains, leading from the service exit into the shadowed corridor. I froze. No one else was supposed to be in the mall. The janitors were long gone, and I hadn't heard any delivery trucks. I followed the footprints cautiously, my flashlight beam shaking. They led toward the old department store, a place that had been abandoned for nearly 10 years. The doors were locked, the glass windows dusty and opaque. But as I shined my light on the glass, I thought I saw a figure inside, a tall man standing perfectly still, staring at me. My heart raced. I blinked. He was gone. For the next few nights, the incidents escalated. The stains seemed to pulse, darkening as if wet, and more footprints appeared. Sometimes I would hear faint dragging sounds like someone moving a heavy cart across the tiles, but no one was there. My walkie-talkie would pick up static voices, whispers calling my name softly. Laura. Laura. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, my imagination, or just stress, but the feeling of being watched never left. One night, around 2 a.m., I was making my rounds near the food court when the lights flickered violently. The mall seemed to groan, the tiles under my boots vibrating subtly. I froze at the back corridor near the service exit. In the dim light, I saw it. A figure crouched on the ground, its head low, moving slowly toward the tiles. My stomach sank. I raised my flashlight, but it vanished instantly, leaving only the reddish stains on the floor. I decided to talk to someone who might know more, the old mall janitor, Mr. Thompson, who had worked there for over 30 years. He was reluctant at first, but eventually shared what he knew. "There's been incidents," he said quietly, leaning close. "People disappear. Bloodstains always show up near that exit, then vanish during the day. Some say it's the spirit of a worker who got trapped during renovations years ago. Others say it's something that feeds on the mall's emptiness. I wanted to laugh, but the blood-stained tiles, the moving shadows, and the whispers proved otherwise. This wasn't imagination. Something in the mall was alive, watching, waiting. The climax came a week into my shifts. I was making my last rounds, trying to finish early. The service exit was open, something I had never seen before. My flashlight flickered as I stepped cautiously toward the door. That's when I heard it, a dragging sound, heavy, deliberate. I spun around. In the corridor, a figure moved. Tall, broad, completely black, featureless. No face, no eyes, but I could feel it looking at me. I ran. My boots echoed against the tiles, my flashlight swinging wildly. Behind me, the dragging sound followed, relentless. I reached the abandoned department store, the air thick with metallic scent. The tiles were now smeared with dark stains forming grotesque shapes, almost like footprints, but larger, impossible. I stumbled, my hand hitting the doorframe. When I looked up, the figure was at the entrance, standing perfectly still, its presence pressing into my chest. I don't remember how I got out. I only remember bursting through the mall doors into the cold night, my heart hammering, lungs burning. The dragging sound stopped the moment I left. But I know it didn't end. Even now, weeks later, I avoid that mall entirely. I have nightmares of the stains spreading, of that featureless figure crawling out of the shadows. I dream of the whispers calling my name in empty corridors, of dragging footsteps just behind me. Friends say I'm imagining things, but I know what I experienced. That service exit, those stains, the mall itself, it waits, patient, for the next person alone enough to encounter it. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Fears for daily horror stories that will keep you questioning every shadow and every sound in the night. Don't forget to hit the bell, because the next story might be waiting just outside your window. The blood-stained service exit was only the beginning. Somewhere, in another mall, in a dark corridor near a loading dock, another presence waits, patient, silent, and hungry for the next person alone in the night. My name is Ryan Fletcher. I'm 29, an IT consultant who usually spends more time staring at servers than people. I'm not exactly the outgoing type. Weekends are spent at home with my cat, or occasionally wandering the city late at night. My life was predictable, orderly, and honestly, lonely. But that all changed the night I was assigned a temporary security shift at the Ridgeway Mall. I'd taken the job partly for the extra money and partly out of curiosity. Ridgeway is one of those sprawling suburban malls that was built in the early 80s and expanded haphazardly over the decades. Some sections are modern, shiny, with polished floors and bright lights, while others, like the basement parking structure, still feel raw and unfinished, like they were abandoned before they were even finished. I'd been told by my supervisor to keep an eye on the empty spaces while the renovation crews worked, but I didn't expect the building itself to feel alive. That night, I arrived around 9 p.m. The main mall was quiet, almost eerily so, with only a janitor moving carts of supplies in the food court. The parking basement, however, was a different story. Low ceilings, dim flickering lights, and narrow concrete pillars stretching in every direction made it feel like a maze. The smell of damp concrete and oil from forgotten maintenance carts hung in the air. My boots echoed in the cavernous space with every step. And even though the area was empty, the sound seemed to ripple, as though the walls were listening. I had completed a few laps when I noticed something unusual. Near the far end of the basement, where the shadows gathered between the support pillars, there was a car parked. Odd, since no vehicles were supposed to be there after hours. Its windows were tinted, and the headlights were off. Yet the engine seemed faintly alive. The subtle vibration beneath my feet hinted someone had been inside recently. I called out, "Security! This is Ryan. Anyone here?" Silence. Only the hum of the basement lights answered me. I assumed it was some contractor who had overstayed and continued my patrol. An hour later, I returned to the same spot. The car was gone. My curiosity nagged at me, but I shrugged it off. Old basements always play tricks on your mind. But then I noticed footprints in the dust on the concrete floor, barefoot, small, leading deeper into the shadows, toward the maintenance elevators. I followed them cautiously. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but pillars and more empty space. The footprints disappeared at the elevator doors, which were locked. I checked the control panel, everything normal. The chill in the air made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I shook it off. Must have been another contractor. Over the next 2 nights, strange things escalated. I would patrol the basement, only to find items out of place. A broom pushed against the wall, a box of tools opened, cables strewn across the floor. Nothing appeared stolen, just disturbed. And always I would notice the footprints, sometimes small, sometimes impossibly large, as though whoever, or whatever, had been walking there didn't follow human rules. One night I heard a sound I will never forget. A rhythmic scraping, like fingernails or claws dragging across concrete. I froze mid-step, straining to hear over the hum of the lights. It came from the far corner behind a cluster of pillars. My heartbeat thumped so loudly I was sure the figure would hear it. The scraping moved closer, circling around me in slow, deliberate patterns. I shined my flashlight, but all I saw were shadows. My voice caught in my throat when I whispered, "Who's there?" The next morning I learned why my unease had been justified. One of the overnight janitors, a young man named Alex, hadn't returned home. He had been doing his rounds in the basement and vanished completely. Security cameras showed him entering the far end of the basement at around 2:15 a.m., but the footage abruptly cut to static for 30 seconds before resuming, and Alex was gone. No footprints, no sign of struggle, nothing. After that, the basement felt wrong. I tried to avoid it, walking through only when necessary, flashlight sweeping constantly, ears straining for the slightest sound. That's when I met an old night guard, Mr. Whitman, a retired officer who'd been working at Ridgeway for decades. He told me something that made my stomach knot. "There's a story," he said, leaning on his cane. "Years ago, during a renovation, a worker was trapped in the basement. They never found his body. Some say the basement has a mind of its own. It keeps people. Sometimes it wants company. Sometimes it wants more." I didn't want to believe him. I had logic, training, and reason, but each night, the evidence piled against me. The footprints that changed size, the whispers echoing off the concrete, the scraping sounds that moved in impossible patterns. I started seeing figures in the corner of my eyes, disappearing when I looked directly at them. Shadows began to feel solid, almost pressing into me as I walked. The climax came on my 4th shift. I was alone in the basement, checking the far end near the maintenance elevators. My flashlight flickered violently as I rounded a pillar, and I froze. There, in the beam, a figure crouched low. Its face was obscured by darkness, but its limbs were unnaturally long, dragging along the floor. I tried to back away quietly, but I knocked over a bucket. The sound echoed and the figure lunged, glided toward me. I ran. Pillars blurred past, my flashlight swinging wildly, the figure following silently, impossibly fast. I could hear its breathing, or maybe it was mine amplified by fear. I stumbled into a section of the basement that didn't exist on the floor plans, a narrow corridor with walls that seemed to close in. The scraping was right behind me. Then, suddenly, it stopped. I reached the stairs that led to the main mall. As I climbed, I dared a glance backward. The corridor was empty, perfectly normal, as if the basement had never tried to trap me at all. My heart was hammering, sweat pouring down my face, but I made it to the exit. Once outside, the cold night air hit me like a wall. I didn't stop running until I reached my car in the empty lot. Even now, weeks later, I avoid that mall entirely. I dream of the basement, of footprints appearing and disappearing, of the scraping sound that follows me through the dark. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake to the sound of dragging footsteps just outside my apartment, like the basement has followed me home. The disappearance of Alex was never solved. Security footage remains missing, and the basement is still operational during renovations. But no one volunteers for night shifts down there anymore. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The Ridgeway Mall basement is alive, patient, and waiting for the next person foolish or lonely enough to wander its corridors after dark. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Fears for daily horror stories that will keep you questioning every shadow and every sound in the night. Don't forget to hit the bell, because the next story might be waiting just outside your window. The disappearance in the parking basement was just one of many unsolved mysteries hidden in malls across the country. And somewhere else, under the fluorescent hum of another empty mall, another shadow waits. Silent, patient, and hungry for the next soul to wander into the darkness.